Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? The ones who are supposed to believe in you the most? Imagine spending years building something incredible, only to have your own sister tell everyone you're too broke to attend a family gathering. That's exactly what happened to me. But here's the thing about assumptions. They can come crashing down in the most spectacular way. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how my sister told everyone I was too poor to attend our family reunion until my private jet landed. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Mapleton, I was always the odd one out. It wasn't a bad childhood by any means. Our town had that picture-perfect main street with hanging flower baskets in summer and twinkling lights during the holidays. My parents owned Mitchell's Hardware, a store that had been the backbone of our family for 2 generations. Everyone knew everyone, and life had a certain predictable rhythm to it. Wake up, go to school, help at the store, attend Friday night. Football games, repeat. For most people in Mapleton, including my sister Rachel, that rhythm was comforting. For me, it felt like being trapped in someone else's song. Rachel was everything Mapleton valued: practical, reliable, community-minded. She was the homecoming queen who married her high school sweetheart Tom within a year of graduation. By 23, she was working as a loan officer at First Mapleton Bank, had a down payment on a colonial-style house 3 blocks from our parents, and was expecting her first child. At family dinners, our parents would beam with pride as Rachel discussed her promotion or the nursery color scheme. Meanwhile, I'd be sketching designs on napkins, dreaming of skyscrapers and city lights. "Sarah, honey, are you listening?" my mother would ask, noticing my distraction. Rachel was just telling us about their new mortgage rate. I'd smile and nod, but inside I was suffocating. It wasn't that I didn't love my family or even Mapleton itself. It was more that I felt like a wildflower trying to grow in a carefully manicured garden. Every time I mentioned wanting to start my own design business in Chicago, the reactions ranged from concerned looks to outright dismissal. "The design world is so competitive," my father would say with a worried frown. "And Chicago is expensive. Maybe you could work for the interior design shop on Elm Street." Carol's daughter did that after she finished at community college. Rachel was less subtle. "Sarah's always had her head in the clouds," she'd say with a little laugh that made it seem like an endearing trait rather than a criticism. "Remember when she was 10 and wanted to redesign the mayor's office? Some things never change. But some things do change." The summer after I turned 22, I'd saved enough from working at the hardware store to take a chance. I still remember the morning I left. The air was thick with August heat, and my small Honda Civic was packed to the brim with everything I could fit. Rachel stood on our parents' porch, her 7-month pregnant belly protruding beneath her Mapleton Bank polo shirt. "You know you can always come back when things don't work out," she said, giving me a hug that felt more like a goodbye than a "see you later." Not if, but when things don't work out. That was Rachel's way. She wasn't being cruel, just practical in her own mind. My father helped me load the last box while my mother pressed a brown paper bag of sandwiches and cookies into my hands, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Call us when you get there, even if it's late," she insisted. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught a glimpse of my family in the rearview mirror. My mother waving, my father's arm around her shoulders, and Rachel standing slightly apart, one hand on her belly and the other raised in a half-hearted wave. I felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in my life, no one was expecting anything of me, which meant I could become anyone I wanted. The first year in Chicago was brutal in ways I'd never imagined. My savings disappeared faster than I'd anticipated, eaten up by rent. For a studio apartment so small I could touch opposing walls if I stretched out my arms. I found work at a coffee shop near the design district, strategically choosing it so I could network with professionals who came in for their morning lattes. I'd slip my business card, printed at the copy shop with the last of my first month's budget, into their hands along with their change. "I'm a designer," I'd say with more confidence than I felt. "If you ever need freelance work, I'd love to talk." Most people would smile politely and pocket the card, which I imagined went straight into the trash once they left. But I kept at it, working on my portfolio at night after 8-hour shifts on my feet. I lived on ramen noodles and free-day-old pastries from the coffee shop. When my parents called, I'd describe Chicago in glowing terms, carefully omitting the cockroaches in my apartment, or how I'd had to choose between paying my phone bill and buying new shoes when my only pair developed a hole. Rachel called less frequently, busy with her new baby and her comfortable life. When she did, there was always an undercurrent to her questions. "So, designed any skyscrapers yet?" she'd ask with a light laugh. "Not yet," I'd reply, trying to keep my tone upbeat. But I did get a small project helping redesign a local boutique's layout. "That's nice," she'd say, in that tone that suggested it wasn't really. "Tom just got a promotion. We're thinking of adding a sunroom to the house." I'd listen to her talk about her perfect life, her voice coming through the phone as I sat on my futon that doubled as my bed, surrounded by design sketches and past due notice reminders. Sometimes after these calls, I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe dreams were for people who didn't understand how the real world worked. But then came the day that changed everything. I was working my usual shift at the coffee shop when a woman in a sharp suit ordered a complicated drink that took me 3 tries to get right. When I finally handed it to her, apologizing for the delay, she didn't seem annoyed. Instead, she was looking at a sketch I'd left on the counter, a redesign concept for the coffee shop's layout that the owner had asked me to work on. "Did you do this?" she asked, picking up the paper. I nodded, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "It's just a rough idea for making the space more efficient." "It's good," she said, studying it more closely. "The flow is intuitive, and I like how you've maximized the natural light." She introduced herself as Elaine Winters, principal designer at Winters & Associates, a firm that specialized in boutique hotel renovations. Before she left, she handed me her card. "We're looking for a junior designer with fresh ideas. Send me your portfolio." I spent the entire night refining my portfolio, fueled by black coffee and the first real hope I'd felt in months. 2 interviews later, I had an entry-level position at Winters & Associates. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was a foot in the door. And more importantly, it was a validation that my dreams weren't just naive fantasies. Over the next 2 years, I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. I was first in the office and last to leave. I volunteered for the projects no one else wanted and solved problems before they reached Elaine's desk. I learned everything I could, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. When a major client was unhappy with a proposed design, I stayed up 3 nights straight reworking it, presenting an alternative that not only saved the contract but expanded it. Elaine noticed. "You're not just good, Sarah," she told me after that presentation. "You have an instinct for this business that can't be taught." When Elaine decided to open a satellite office in New York, she asked me to help lead the expansion. My salary tripled, and suddenly, I could afford a real apartment, one with a bedroom and a kitchen that had more than 2 feet of counter space. I started paying off my student loans and even began setting aside money for investments. But the real breakthrough came when Elaine and I were working late on a pitch for Altitude Luxury Hotels, a chain known for their extraordinary attention to detail and clientele of celebrities and business moguls. The CEO, Martin Ellis, was notorious for being impossible to please. "He's rejected the last 5 proposals," Elaine said, rubbing her temples. "I'm out of ideas." I hesitated, then pulled out sketches I'd been working on privately. What if we went in a different direction? Something that breaks their usual pattern but still maintains the luxury their clients expect. Elaine looked at my concepts, a blend of modern minimalism with unexpected touches of local culture for each hotel location. "This is risky," she said slowly, "but it might be exactly what they need." When we presented to Martin Ellis, he sat stone-faced through most of the presentation. But when we showed my designs, something changed in his expression. He leaned forward, asked questions, engaged. By the end of the meeting, not only had he approved our proposal, but he'd also asked who had developed the core concepts. Elaine didn't hesitate. "Sarah Mitchell. She's going to be running point on this project." That contract changed everything. The budget was enormous, the visibility unprecedented. I found myself flying to different cities, overseeing installations, making decisions that affected millions of dollars in investments. My name started appearing in design magazines. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And other luxury brands began reaching out. Elaine, recognizing my value, offered me a partnership. "You've earned this," she said as we signed the papers, making me a junior partner. I've never seen anyone grow so much in such a short time. 3 years after leaving Mapleton, I was a partner at what was now Winters & Mitchell Design Associates. I had an apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, a wardrobe of clothes I once would have been afraid to touch in high-end stores, and a reputation as one of the rising stars in luxury commercial design. Our firm's work with Altitude had led to contracts with 3 other major hotel chains, 2 luxury retail brands, and a famous restaurant group. Through it all, I'd maintained minimal contact with my family. Calls home became less frequent as my work took over my life. When I did call, I kept the conversations focused on them. My parents' health, Rachel's kids, the goings-on in Mapleton. I sent generous gifts for birthdays and Christmas, but I never shared the details of my success. Partly because I was always working, partly because I was still afraid of somehow jinxing it, but mostly because I'd grown tired of Rachel's subtle digs about my artistic hobby. The last time I'd been home was for my nephew's christening 3 years ago. I'd flown commercial, worn a simple dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, hiding the designer label, and deflected questions about my work with vague answers. Rachel had introduced me to her country club friends as her little sister who's trying to make it as a designer in Chicago. I'd smiled and nodded, letting the misconception stand. At the time, it had seemed easier than explaining the truth. Which brings me to last month, when the email from Rachel appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "Family Reunion, July 4th weekend." I was in the middle of a conference call about our newest project, a complete overhaul of a historic hotel in San Francisco, when it came through. I only opened it after the call ended, expecting a simple invitation. Instead, I got this. "Sarah, we're having the family reunion at Grandma and Grandpa's lake house to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. Everyone's coming, even distant cousins we haven't seen in years. I know you're probably still struggling to make ends meet in Chicago, so don't feel obligated to come if you can't afford it. We understand. If you can make it, let me know and I'll see if anyone has a spare room you can crash in. Love, Rachel." I stared at the screen, a familiar feeling rising in my chest, that mixture of hurt and anger that only Rachel could provoke. After all these years, she still saw me as the irresponsible dreamer who'd never amount to anything. In her mind, I was probably still working at that coffee shop, scraping by on tips and the occasional design project. My assistant Jessica knocked on my office door, pulling me from my thoughts. "Sarah, Martin Ellis is online too. He wants to discuss using the company jet for the Altitude board meeting next month." The company jet. A recent acquisition that still felt surreal to me. Altitude had been so pleased with our work that they'd offered us a long-term contract with perks that included occasional use of their corporate jet for business travel. As a partner, I had access to it for important client meetings and site visits. I thanked Jessica and took the call, but my mind was elsewhere. An idea was forming. Petty, perhaps, but satisfying in a way I couldn't ignore. What if I did go to the family reunion? What if, instead of downplaying my success as I had, for years I showed up exactly as I was now? After finishing the call with Martin, I called my best friend Diana. She'd been with me through everything, the early struggles, the late nights, the breakthroughs. She knew me better than anyone, including my family. "You will not believe what Rachel just sent me," I said, forwarding her the email. Diana was silent for a moment after reading it. "Wow," she finally said. "That's impressively condescending." Right? After all these years, she still thinks I'm failing. I haven't bothered to correct her because it seemed easier, but now, I don't know, Diana. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. "What are you thinking?" Diana asked, a note of caution in her voice. She knew me well enough to recognize when I was plotting something. "I'm thinking about showing up at that reunion, in the company jet." Diana's laugh was both surprised and delighted. "Okay, that's a statement. But are you sure? That's a pretty dramatic way to announce your success." I sighed, leaning back in my chair and looking out at the Chicago skyline. I'm tired of being the family cautionary tale. I've worked too hard to keep pretending I'm barely getting by. Maybe it's time they knew the truth. "Then do it," Diana said simply. "But do it for yourself, not to prove anything to Rachel." I spent the next few days considering whether I should go through with it. Part of me worried it would come across as showy or vindictive. But another part of me, the part that had swallowed Rachel's dismissive comments for years, wanted the satisfaction of seeing her face when she realized how wrong she'd been. In the end, I decided to go. Not just to make a point, but because I genuinely wanted to see my grandparents on their anniversary. They'd always believed in me, even when they didn't quite understand my dreams. Grandpa had slipped me a $100 bill when I left for Chicago, pressing it into my palm with a wink. "For when inspiration strikes," he'd said. That money had paid for my first professional portfolio case. I hadn't responded to Rachel's email yet, and I decided not to. Let her think I wasn't coming. The surprise would be part of the statement. The next step was arranging the logistics. I spoke with Martin about using the jet for the weekend, explaining that I needed to attend a family event in northern Michigan. "Of course," he said easily. "Actually, we'll be flying to Detroit that Thursday for the board meeting. The jet can drop you off on the way back on Friday." I thanked him, still slightly amazed at how simple it was to arrange something that would have seemed impossibly luxurious to me just a few years ago. Next, I called my cousin Emma, the only family member I'd stayed somewhat close with. Emma had always been my ally in the family, defending my choices when others questioned them. "Sarah, it's so good to hear from you," she exclaimed when she picked up. "Are you coming to the reunion? Rachel told everyone you probably couldn't afford it, and Aunt Karen was talking about taking up a collection to buy you a plane ticket." I nearly choked on my coffee. "A collection? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Emma confirmed. "I told them you were doing fine and didn't need charity, but you know how they are. Once Rachel puts an idea in their heads." I filled Emma in on my plans, swearing her to secrecy. "I need someone to pick me up from the regional airport," I explained. "The jet will be landing around noon on Friday." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line before Emma burst out laughing. "You're flying in on a private jet? Oh my God, Sarah, that's brilliant. Rachel is going to lose her mind." "Is it too much?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. I don't want to seem like I'm just trying to show off. "After what she's been saying about you?" "Not at all," Emma assured me. "Listen, you've worked hard for your success. There's nothing wrong with arriving in style. I'll pick you up at the airport and we can make an entrance together." With Emma on board, I felt more confident about my decision. I asked Diana to join me for the weekend as moral support, and she immediately agreed. I wouldn't miss this. For the world, she said, eyes sparkling with mischief. I've been hearing about your family for years, especially Rachel. It's about time I met the woman who's been underestimating you since kindergarten. As the reunion weekend approached, I found myself growing increasingly nervous. What would my parents think? Would they be proud of my success or uncomfortable with its display? Would my grandparents recognize that beneath the trappings of wealth, I was still the same Sarah who used to help Grandma make apple pies in her lake house kitchen? And what about the extended family? Cousins, aunts, uncles, how would they react? 3 days before the reunion, a crisis erupted with our San Francisco hotel project. The Historical Preservation Committee had suddenly objected to several key elements of our design, threatening to derail months of work and a contract worth millions. As the lead on the project, I was expected to fix it. "We need you in San Francisco," Elaine said, her voice tense over the conference call. "The committee meets tomorrow, and if we don't address their concerns immediately, we'll lose the permits." I looked at my calendar, at the blocked-off days for the family reunion. "I can't," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I have a family commitment this weekend that I can't reschedule." There was a pause on the line. In 4 years of working together, I had never prioritized personal plans over a work emergency. "Is everything okay?" Elaine asked, genuine concern replacing the tension in her voice. "Yes," I said, making a split-second decision. "But I need to do this. I can handle the committee remotely, set up a video conference, send them the revised plans tonight. I'll work around the clock if necessary, but I need Friday through Sunday off." After some negotiation, we reached a compromise. I would work late into Wednesday night preparing the new proposals and lead a video conference with the committee Thursday morning. If they accepted our revisions, I would be free to leave for Michigan on Friday as planned. If not, all bets were off. I barely slept Wednesday night, revising designs and preparing contingency arguments for every possible objection. By the time the video conference started Thursday morning, I had been awake for nearly 30 hours, fueled by coffee and determination. The meeting lasted 3 hours, with pointed questions and tense discussions, but in the end, the committee approved our revisions with minor adjustments. As soon as the call ended, I collapsed onto my office sofa, in relief. Jessica brought me a glass of champagne. "You did it," she said with a smile. "And Martin confirmed the jet will drop you off in Michigan tomorrow around noon." Thursday night, as Diana and I packed for the weekend, my phone rang. It was Emma. "Just a heads up," she said without preamble. "Rachel's been telling everyone you're definitely not coming. She said she got an email from you saying you couldn't afford the trip." I frowned, setting down the dress I'd been folding. I never sent her an email. "Yeah, I figured," Emma sighed. "But now Grandma's upset. She was really hoping to see you." A wave of anger washed over me. It was one thing for Rachel to make assumptions about my financial situation, but to invent a response from me? That crossed a line. "Don't worry," I assured Emma. "I'll be there tomorrow and I'll clear everything up with Grandma." "Perfect. Oh, and Sarah? I haven't told anyone about your, mode of transportation. I figure that should be a surprise. For everyone." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect summer day for flying. Diana and I met the Altitude corporate jet at a private airfield outside Chicago. The pilot, a friendly man named Captain Reynolds, greeted us warmly. "Ms. Mitchell, good to see you again. We should have you in northern Michigan around noon, weather permitting." The interior of the jet never failed to impress me, all cream leather seats and polished wood accents. As we settled in, a flight attendant offered us mimosas and breakfast. Diana raised her glass in a toast. "Two homecomings," she said with a smile. I clinked my glass against hers, trying to quell the butterflies in my stomach. "To finally showing my true self," I added. The flight was smooth. and I used the time to catch Diana up on various family members she'd be meeting. My parents are good people, I explained. They never really understood my dreams, but they didn't try to stop me either. They just worried. And Rachel? Diana asked, the question I'd been anticipating. I sighed, looking out the window at the clouds below us. Rachel is complicated. She's always been the golden child. Did everything right, followed all the rules. When I left for Chicago, I think she took it as a personal rejection of the life she'd chosen. Like by wanting something different, I was saying her choices weren't good enough. That doesn't justify how she's treated you, Diana pointed out. No, it doesn't, I agreed. But it helps me understand it at least. She's built her whole identity around being the successful, responsible one. Finding out that her flighty little sister actually made it. I'm not sure how she'll handle that. As we began our descent toward the regional airport near Lake Clearwater, I felt a surge of anxiety. Was I making a mistake? Would this grand entrance only widen the rift between Rachel and me? For a moment, I considered asking Captain Reynolds to turn around and take us back to Chicago. Diana, sensing my unease, placed her hand over mine. Remember why you're doing this, she said softly. Not to show off, but to finally be honest about who you've become. You've earned this moment, Sarah. The jet touched down smoothly on the runway, a jarring contrast to the small private planes and occasional commercial flights that typically serve this airport. As promised, Emma was waiting when we deplaned, her eyes wide as she watched us descend the stairs. Holy cow, she exclaimed, hugging me tightly. When you said private jet, I pictured something tiny. This is... wow. I laughed, some of my tension easing at her enthusiasm. It's a company perk, I explained as I introduced her to Diana. Honestly, I'm still not used to it myself. Emma had brought her SUV, and we loaded our luggage into the back. So, she said as we pulled away from the airport, the reunion's already started. Everyone arrived yesterday or this morning. They're all at the lake house now, having a barbecue lunch. My heart began to race. In less than 30 minutes, I would be facing my entire family, including Rachel, for the first time in 3 years. And this time, there would be no hiding who I'd become. How's Grandma? I asked, trying to focus on what mattered most. Emma said she was upset when she thought I wasn't coming. Emma nodded, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. She's been looking forward to seeing you. You were always her favorite, you know. She keeps your design magazine features in a scrapbook. I blinked in surprise. She knows about those? Of course, Emma smiled. Who do you think sends them to her? I've been keeping her updated on your career. Not everyone in the family thinks you're struggling, Sarah. Some of us have been paying attention. This revelation stunned me. All this time, I'd assumed my entire family shared Rachel's perception of me as the family failure. The thought that Grandma had been proudly collecting evidence of my success brought unexpected tears to my eyes. As we turned onto the private road leading to my grandparents' lake house, a sprawling cedar and stone home that had been in the family for 3 generations, my anxiety returned full force. Through the trees, I could see glimpses of people scattered across the lawn and dock, coolers and folding chairs set up for the weekend's festivities. Emma parked behind a row of other vehicles, and for a moment, the 3 of us sat in silence. Ready? She finally asked. I took a deep breath and nodded. As I'll ever be. We got out of the car, and I smoothed down the simple but obviously expensive sundress I'd chosen for the occasion. With my designer sunglasses and the subtle makeup Diana had helped me apply on the jet, I looked every inch the successful businesswoman I'd become. It wasn't a costume. This was my life now, but it still felt strange to be displaying it so openly to my family. No one noticed us at first as we walked down the path from the parking area. I spotted my parents by the grill, my father flipping. burgers while my mother arranged condiments on a nearby table. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins milled about, some playing lawn games, others lounging in chairs overlooking the lake. And there was Rachel, holding court on the deck, a glass of wine in hand as she chatted with Aunt Karen and Uncle Bob. It was my grandmother who saw me first. She was sitting in her favorite Adirondack chair near the water, my grandfather beside her when she glanced up and did a double take. "Sarah?" she called out, her voice carrying across the lawn. "Sarah, is that you?" Conversations paused, heads turned, and suddenly I was the center of attention. My grandmother rose from her chair, moving toward me with surprising speed for a woman of 75. "Oh, my darling girl," she said, enveloping me in a hug that smelled of her familiar lavender perfume. "I thought you weren't coming." I hugged her back fiercely, those unexpected tears threatening again. "Of course I came, Grandma. I wouldn't miss your anniversary for anything." My grandfather joined us, his weathered face creased in a broad smile. "There's our girl," he said, giving me a hug of his own. "More beautiful every time I see you." One by one, family members approached, aunts kissing my cheeks, uncles shaking my hand, cousins I hadn't seen in years exclaiming over how well I looked. My parents appeared, my mother's eyes swimming with tears as she embraced me. "You should have told us you were coming," she scolded gently. "We would have picked you up." "I wanted to surprise you," I said, which was true enough. Over my mother's shoulder, I could see Rachel, still standing on the deck, her expression a mixture of shock and something unreadable. My father hugged me next, his embrace solid and familiar. "You look good, kiddo," he said, studying my face. "City life must be agreeing with you after all." I smiled, about to respond, when Rachel finally approached, her steps measured and careful. "Sarah," she said, her voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "What a surprise. I thought you emailed, saying you couldn't make it." The gathering fell oddly quiet, sensing the tension between us. I kept my expression neutral. "That's strange, since I never sent that email. In fact, I never responded to your invitation at all." Rachel's cheeks flushed slightly. "Well, I just assumed." "How did you get here anyway?" "Emma didn't mention picking you up from the bus station." This was it, the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Emma stepped forward, a slight smile playing at her lips. "I picked Sarah up from the airport, actually." "Airport?" Rachel's brow furrowed. "You flew? But the tickets must have cost." Diana, who had been standing quietly beside me, chose that moment to extend her hand to Rachel. "Hi, I'm Diana, Sarah's friend from Chicago. So nice to finally meet you. Sarah's told me so much about all of you." Rachel took Diana's hand automatically, her confusion evident. "You came together? Both of you flew?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, we flew. And to answer your question, Rachel, I can afford it. I've been able to afford a lot of things for quite some time now." Aunt Karen, never one to miss potential drama, inserted herself into the conversation. "Oh? Has your little design business taken off then, dear?" There was a patronizing note in her voice that reminded me so much of Rachel that I had to suppress a smile. "You could say that," I replied. Winters and Mitchell Design Associates has been doing well. We specialize in luxury hotel design and high-end commercial spaces. Uncle Bob, who worked in real estate, perked up at this. "Winters and Mitchell? Wait, are you the Mitchell in that name?" I nodded, unable to keep a hint of pride from my voice. "I made partner 3 years ago." This revelation caused a ripple of murmurs through the gathered family. Rachel's face had gone from flushed to pale. "Partner," she repeated. "But you never said anything." "You never asked," I said simply. "You always just assumed I was struggling." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group, broken by my grandfather's hearty laugh. Well, I for one am not surprised, he declared, clapping me on the shoulder. Our Sarah was always going to do something special. Now, who wants another burger before they get cold? His intervention broke the tension, and people began to drift back to their previous activities, though I could hear the buzz of conversation centered around this new information about me. My mother pulled me aside, her expression concerned. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked quietly. "All these years we've been worried about you." I felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry, Mom. At first I was just focused on making it work. And then, I don't know. It became easier to let everyone think what they wanted to think. Including that you couldn't afford to come to your grandparents' anniversary?" There was a hint of hurt in her voice. "That wasn't my doing," I said firmly. "I never told anyone I couldn't afford to come." My mother glanced toward Rachel, who was now engaged in an intense discussion with her husband, Tom. "I see," she said simply. "Well, I'm just glad you're here now, and this friend of yours seems lovely." Diana had been expertly mingling, her natural charm winning over even my most reserved relatives. I watched her laughing with my cousins, already fitting in as if she'd known them for years. "She's been my rock," I told my mother. "She was there through all the hard times, in the beginning." My mother squeezed my hand. "I wish we could have been there for you too." "You were," I assured her. Knowing I always had a home to come back to if things didn't work out, that meant everything. The afternoon progressed more smoothly than I'd anticipated. I caught up with relatives, shared sanitized stories about my work, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of being at the lake again. Diana and Emma became fast friends, united in their protective attitudes toward me. It wasn't until later, as the sun began to set and someone started a bonfire on the beach, that Rachel cornered me, alone. I had walked down to the dock for a moment of quiet, watching the golden light dancing across the water, when I heard footsteps behind me. "So, you're rich now," Rachel said without preamble, coming to stand beside me at the edge of the dock. I turned to look at her, taking in the familiar features that had sharpened somewhat with age. "I do well," I said carefully, "but that's not why I came." "No? The private jet wasn't about making an entrance?" My eyebrows rose. "How did you—" "Emma told Tom, who told me," Rachel said with a dismissive wave. "Was that really necessary? Sarah? A private jet?" I felt a flare of anger. Was it necessary to tell everyone I couldn't afford to come when I never said any such thing? Rachel had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I just assumed—" "Yes, you did," I cut her off. "You've been assuming things about my life for years, Rachel. You decided I was failing because it made you feel better about your own choices." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. For a moment, I regretted the harshness of my words, but years of accumulated frustration wouldn't let me take them back. Rachel looked out over the water, her profile illuminated by the setting sun. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than before. "Is that what you think? That I wanted you to fail? Didn't you?" I asked. "Every time we spoke, you'd find some way to remind me how risky my choices were, how much more sensible your life was. You never once asked if I was happy or successful. You just assumed I wasn't." Rachel's fingers tightened on the railing of the dock. "I was worried about you," she said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "Moving to Chicago with hardly any savings, chasing some dream that might never pay off. Do you know how many people fail in creative fields?" "Of course I do," I replied. "I lived with that fear every day for years. The difference is that you seem to expect failure, maybe even want it, while I was doing everything in my power to avoid it." A long silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant sounds of laughter from the bonfire and the gentle lapping of water against the dock. When Rachel turned to face me, there was something unexpected in her expression. Vulnerability. "I didn't want you to fail, Sarah," she said softly. "But I was afraid for you. And maybe—" She hesitated, as if struggling to admit something to herself as much as to me. Maybe I was a little envious. This confession caught me off guard. Envious? Of what? I was sleeping on a futon and eating ramen for the first year. Rachel gave a small, sad laugh. Of your courage. You did what I never could. You left. You took a chance. I've spent my whole life in Mapleton, following the path everyone expected. Don't get me wrong, she added quickly. I love Tom. I love our kids. But sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to try something different. The anger that had been simmering inside me began to cool, replaced by a complicated mixture of sympathy and vindication. Why didn't you ever say any of this? She shrugged, looking embarrassed. It was easier to convince myself you were struggling than to admit I might have played it too safe. And then when you stopped sharing details about your life, I just filled in the blanks with what I expected to hear. She met my eyes directly. I'm sorry about the email, about telling everyone. You couldn't come, that was petty. It was, I agreed, not quite ready to let her off the hook entirely. It hurt, Grandma. Rachel winced. I know, I didn't think that through. She hesitated, then asked, So the private jet, is that really a regular thing for you now? I couldn't help but smile at the note of awe in her voice. Not regular, no. It's a company perk for important business trips. But I've done well, Rachel. Really well. The firm has contracts with some of the biggest luxury hotel chains in the world. I have an apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. I'm not saying this to brag, but because for years I've downplayed my success around the family, and I'm tired of hiding it. Why did you hide it? The question was simple, but cut to the heart of something I'd never fully articulated, even to myself. I took my time answering, watching a pair of ducks skim across the darkening water. At first, it was because success came slowly, and then in surges. By the time I'd achieved anything worth mentioning, it felt like too much time had passed, like I'd have to explain years of development all at once. And then I glanced at her, deciding to be completely honest. I think I was avoiding this exact conversation, the awkwardness of having to say, Actually, I'm doing great when everyone assumed I wasn't. Rachel nodded slowly. And I didn't make that any easier. No, I agreed, you didn't. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words and years of misunderstandings between us. Then Rachel surprised me again. Tell me about your work, she said. Really tell me. I want to know what you do. And so, as the sky darkened and stars began to appear above the lake, I told my sister about my life for the first time in years. I described the challenges of designing spaces that had to be both practical and breathtaking. The thrill of seeing my concepts come to life in buildings around the world, the pressure and reward of working with demanding clients. I told her about my team, about the young designers I now mentored the way Elaine had once mentored me. Rachel listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that suggested she was genuinely interested. As I spoke, I realized that this was perhaps the first real conversation we'd had as adults, not as the roles we'd assigned each other, but as two women with different lives and experiences. You really love it, don't you? She said when I finally fell silent. There was no envy in her voice now, just a kind of wistful recognition. I do, I admitted. It's challenging and exhausting sometimes, but I can't imagine doing anything else. Rachel smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I'm glad. And I'm proud of you, Sarah. I should have said that a long time ago. The words I'd waited years to hear from my sister brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Before I could respond, we heard footsteps on the dock and turned to see Diana approaching, her silhouette backlit by the bonfire on the beach. Sorry to interrupt, she said, looking between us uncertainly. Your mom sent me to find you both. They're about to do the anniversary toast for your grandparents. We'll be right there. I told her. As Diana retreated, Rachel gave me a curious look. She seems nice. Is she more than just a friend? The question startled a laugh out of me. Diana? No, we're just friends. Best friends. She's been dating the same guy for 3 years. They'll probably get engaged soon. Rachel nodded, looking slightly embarrassed by her assumption. Sorry, I just thought. The way she looks out for you. She's protective, I acknowledged. She's seen me through a lot. As we began walking back toward the bonfire, Rachel said quietly, I should have been there for you too. I'm your sister. I stopped, turning to face her in the gathering darkness. You're here now, I said. Maybe that's what matters. The bonfire cast a warm, golden glow over the faces of my family as Rachel and I rejoined the group. My grandmother's eyes sparkled with happiness as she took in the sight of us approaching together, and I wondered if she had intentionally sent Diana to find us both, hoping for exactly this reconciliation. My grandfather stood at the center of the circle, a glass of champagne raised high. Now that everyone's here, he said with a significant look in our direction, I'd like to propose a toast to my beautiful bride of 50 years. As glasses were raised and my grandparents shared a tender kiss to the cheers of the family, I felt Diana slip her arm through mine. Everything okay? She whispered. I nodded, a sense of peace settling over me for the first time since arriving. Better than okay, I murmured back. The evening progressed with more drinks, stories, and laughter around the fire. The tension that had characterized my arrival had dissipated, replaced by a genuine warmth as family members approached me with questions about my work, this time without the patronizing edge I'd feared. Even Aunt Karen seemed impressed when I showed her photos of the San Francisco hotel renovation on my phone. And you designed all this? She asked, zooming in on details of the lobby concept. It's absolutely gorgeous, Sarah. I had no idea. None of us did, my mother said, having joined our conversation. There was a note of gentle reproach in her voice, but pride too. You've been keeping secrets, sweetheart. Not secrets, I corrected her. I just didn't know how to talk about it. My father, overhearing, put his arm around my shoulders. Well, now we know, and we expect regular updates from now on. No more of this mystery woman business. As the night wore on, families with younger children began to disperse to their various accommodations, some staying at the lake house itself, others at nearby hotels or rental cabins. Emma had arranged for Diana and me to stay at a small guest cottage on my grandparents' property, a short walk from the main house. I figured you'd want some privacy, she explained as she handed me the key. Plus, it's the nicest spot aside from the master bedroom. The cottage was charming, a single room with a sleeping loft, rustic wooden furniture, and large windows, overlooking the lake. Diana exclaimed over the view while I set our bags down, feeling suddenly exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the day. That went better than I expected, Diana observed, kicking off her shoes and collapsing into an overstuffed armchair. Your sister seemed almost human by the end there. I smiled, too tired to defend Rachel, but also reluctant to criticize her after our conversation on the dock. It's complicated. We have a lot of history to work through. Diana studied me thoughtfully. The conversation at the dock, good or bad? Good, I think. Honest, at least. Maybe the first real talk we've had in years. I sank onto the edge of the bed, running a hand through my hair. She admitted she was envious of me. Can you believe that? Actually, yes, Diana said matter-of-factly. You took risks she never dared to take, and they paid off. That's bound to stir up complicated feelings. I considered this. Maybe, but she has a good life too. A loving husband, beautiful kids, stability. Different kinds of success, Diana agreed. The question is whether you both can appreciate that now, instead of competing. As I prepared for bed, I found myself reflecting on Diana's words. Had it been competition all along? Rachel and I, measuring our choices against each other, each secretly fearing we'd chosen wrong? The thought gave me a new perspective on our strained relationship over the years. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the cottage, windows and painting patterns across the wooden floor. Diana was still sleeping soundly, so I slipped out quietly, drawn to the lake that had been the backdrop of so many childhood memories. The air was crisp with morning freshness, dew sparkling on the grass as I made my way down to the water's edge. To my surprise, I found my grandmother already there, seated on her favorite Adirondack chair with a mug of steaming coffee in her hands. "Early riser as always," she said with a smile, patting the chair beside her. "Some things never change." I sat down, accepting the extra mug she offered me from a small side table. The coffee was strong and sweet, exactly how she'd always made it. "The lake is as beautiful as I remembered," I said, looking out over the water, mirror smooth in the early light. She agreed. "Your grandfather and I never tire of this view. 50 years we've been coming here, and every morning feels like a gift." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our coffee and listening to the occasional call of a loon across the water. Finally, my grandmother turned to me, her eyes as clear and perceptive as ever. "I'm glad you and Rachel talked yesterday," she said. "I've been worried about you two for years." I shouldn't have been surprised that she knew. Grandma had always had an uncanny sense for family dynamics. "We're working on it," I said cautiously. She nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "You know, when your mother told me you were moving to Chicago to pursue design, I said to your grandfather, 'That one's going to make her mark on the world.' He bet me $50 you'd be successful within 5 years. I said 3. Her eyes twinkled. "He still owes me that 50. I stared at her in astonishment. "You bet on me?" "Of course we did," she said as if it were obvious. "We always knew you had something special, Sarah. Not just talent, but determination. That's rarer than people think." "But you never said anything," I protested. When I left, everyone acted like I was making a huge mistake. Grandma laughed softly. "Your parents were worried. That's what parents do. And Rachel has always needed to feel certain about her choices. Seeing you choose a different path threatened that certainty." Her insight into Rachel's behavior echoed my own recent revelations. She said she was envious of my courage. "And she meant it," Grandma confirmed. "But that doesn't mean she doesn't love her life, or you. People are complicated, sweetheart. We can envy aspects of someone else's journey while still being content with our own." I pondered this, watching a pair of ducks glide across the lake's surface. I wish I'd understood that sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have stayed away so long. Grandma reached over to pat my hand. "You're here now, and from what Emma tells me, you arrived in quite the style." There was a hint of mischief in her voice. I felt my cheeks flush. "About the jet. That wasn't just to make an entrance. It's a company perk, honestly." "Oh, I believe you," she assured me. "But I also know a statement when I see one. And sometimes, Sarah, statements need to be made, especially in families." Before I could respond to this surprisingly astute observation, we heard voices approaching, my parents, walking hand in hand down the path from the main house. My father carried a large basket that undoubtedly contained breakfast supplies. "Morning, you two early birds," my mother called cheerfully. "We thought we'd do breakfast on the dock for anyone who's up." Soon, the peaceful lakeside was transformed into a bustling gathering spot as more family members emerged from the house and surrounding cottages. Diana joined us, looking refreshed and immediately charming my father with questions about his hardware store. Rachel appeared with her husband Tom and their 2 children, 9-year-old Lily and 7-year-old Max, both of whom regarded me with shy curiosity. Aunt Sarah has a private airplane, Lily informed me solemnly, clearly having overheard adult conversations. Not exactly, I explained, kneeling to her level. I sometimes get to use one for work. Most of the time I travel just like everyone else. But you're rich, right? Max asked with the blunt directness of a 7-year-old. Mom said you must be really rich to have a private plane. I glanced up at Rachel, who looked mortified. Maxwell, that is not what I said, and it's not polite to talk about money. I laughed, diffusing the tension. It's okay. I'm not rich. Max, but I've done well with my work. And you know what? Being successful isn't just about money. It's about finding something you love to do and working hard at it. Max considered this with a serious expression. I want to be a paleontologist and discover new dinosaurs. Is that a good job? That sounds like an excellent job, I assured him. I design buildings and spaces, but discovering dinosaurs would be much cooler. This seemed to satisfy him, and he ran off to join his cousins who were setting up a game of horseshoes nearby. Rachel gave me an apologetic look. Sorry about that. Kids have no filter. Don't worry about it, I said easily. He's adorable. An awkward silence fell between us, neither sure how to build on the fragile understanding we'd reached the night before. Finally, Rachel said, I was thinking, would you want to take the kids out on the paddle boards later? They've been dying to try, but Tom and I are terrible at it. The olive branch was small but significant. I'd love to, I said, remembering how Rachel and I had once spent entire summers racing paddleboards across the lake. Does Lily take after you in the water? You were always faster than me. Rachel's face brightened at the shared memory. She's fearless. Max is more cautious, like Tom. Good, I laughed. Then maybe I'll have a chance against at least one member of your family. The morning passed in a pleasant blur of breakfast, coffee, and easy conversation. As promised, Rachel and I took the children paddleboarding, discovering that Lily had indeed inherited her mother's natural athleticism. However, I was surprised to find that Max, though initially cautious, took to paddleboarding with unexpected enthusiasm once he overcame his fear. By the end of our session, he was challenging his sister to races across the shallower part of the lake, his earlier reserve transformed into gleeful competition. As we guided the children back to shore, Rachel turned to me with a pensive expression. You're really good with them, she observed. Have you ever thought about having kids of your own? The question caught me off guard. In all our conversations about careers and life choices, we'd never ventured into this territory. Sometimes, I admitted, watching as Max and Lily raced ahead of us up the beach. But my lifestyle isn't exactly conducive to parenting. The travel, the unpredictable hours. Rachel nodded, her expression unreadable. I understand that. But, life has a way of presenting opportunities when you least expect them. Just look at this weekend. Before I could ask what she meant, we were interrupted by my mother calling everyone to lunch. The conversation was left hanging, but Rachel's words stayed with me as we rejoined the family gathering on the sprawling lawn. After lunch, as various groups formed for afternoon activities, my father approached me with an unexpected request. Sarah, I was hoping you might help me with something at the boathouse. Just need an extra pair of hands. Curious, I followed him down the winding path to the old wooden boathouse that had been a fixture on the property since before I was born. Inside, the air was cool and slightly musty, filtered sunlight streaming through dusty windows to illuminate the small rowboat, suspended from ceiling hooks. My father moved to a workbench at the back, where I was surprised to see architectural drawings spread out. What's all this? I asked, moving closer to examine them. Plans for renovating the lake house, he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice that I rarely associated with my confident, practical father. Your grandparents are getting older, and the stairs are becoming difficult for them. We've been discussing adding a main floor master suite, Maybe modernizing some other aspects while we're at it. I scanned the drawings with professional interest, immediately noting several issues with the proposed layout. Who drew these up? Carol's nephew. You remember Carol from the design shop on Elm Street? He's studying architecture at the community college. My father hesitated. They're not quite right, though. The flow is awkward, and your mother is concerned about how it would affect the character of the house. Understanding dawned. And, you wanted my professional opinion? He nodded, seeming almost embarrassed. I know you deal with much bigger projects these days, hotels and such, but I thought, since you're here, and you know this house better than some stranger, the request touched me deeply. For years, I'd assumed my parents had little interest in my professional expertise, and here was my father, seeking it out. I'd be happy to look at them, I said warmly. Actually, I'd be happy to do more than that. I could revise these plans, or create new ones altogether. Relief washed over his face. That would be wonderful if you're sure it's not imposing. Your mother will be thrilled. It's not imposing at all, I assured him. I'd love to do this for Grandma and Grandpa. We spent the next hour going over the existing plans, with my father explaining the specific needs and concerns. As we talked, I found myself slipping into professional mode, asking questions about accessibility requirements, budget constraints, and timeline expectations. The same questions I would ask any client. But this was different, more personal. This was a chance to use my skills to give something back to my grandparents, who had always believed in me. When we finally emerged from the boathouse, I noticed Diana engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Rachel on the dock. Curious about this unexpected pairing, I started toward them, but was intercepted by my cousin Emma. Fair warning, she said in a low voice, linking her arm through mine to steer me in another direction. Aunt Karen is on a mission to find out exactly how much money you make. She's been interrogating everyone who might have a clue. I groaned. Of course she is. What should I tell her if she corners me? Emma grinned. I've been telling her you're practically a millionaire with a penthouse apartment and a personal chef. Feel free to elaborate on that fantasy. Not as much of a fantasy as you might think, I admitted, then immediately regretted it when Emma's eyes widened. Seriously? Sarah, are you holding out on me? I knew you were doing well, but... Before I could respond, we were indeed cornered by Aunt Karen, who emerged from the kitchen with suspiciously perfect timing. Sarah, dear, I've been looking everywhere for you. Emma, would you mind if I borrowed your cousin for a moment? I have some questions about interior design for my sunroom renovation. Emma shot me a knowing look before relinquishing my arm. She's all yours, Aunt Karen. I'm sure Sarah has plenty of expert advice to share. As Emma escaped, Aunt Karen wasted no time getting to the point. That private jet must have cost a fortune to charter, she said, her voice pitched somewhere between impressed and scandalized. Tom, your sister's Tom, said planes like that rent for thousands of dollars an hour. It's a company jet, I explained, hoping to deflect her interest. Used for business purposes primarily. I was fortunate to be able to arrange its use for personal travel this one time. A company jet! Aunt Karen's eyebrows nearly reached her hairline. My goodness! And here we all thought you were still struggling to establish yourself. Rachel, always made it sound like your design work was more of a hobby. The last word dripped with implication. I felt a flash of irritation, but kept my tone even. It hasn't been a hobby for quite some time, Aunt Karen. My firm specializes in luxury hospitality design, and we've been fortunate to work with some exceptional clients. How fascinating, she said, eyes gleaming with barely concealed curiosity. And does that sort of work pay well? My friend's daughter is considering interior design, and I'd love to give her some idea of the potential. Despite my annoyance, I had to suppress a smile at her transparent attempt. It varies widely depending on experience, location, and specialization, I said diplomatically. But yes, at the partner level, it can be quite rewarding. Before Aunt Karen could press for specific figures, we were interrupted by the arrival of my nephew Max, out of breath and wide-eyed with excitement. "Aunt Sarah, Mom says to tell you that Diana needs you at the dock right away. It's an emergency." Alarmed, I excused myself from Aunt Karen and hurried toward the lake, Max running alongside me. "What kind of emergency?" I asked him. "Is Diana okay?" "I think so," he said, though he sounded uncertain. "Mom just said to find you fast." When we reached the dock, I was confused to find Diana, Rachel, and several other family members gathered around someone I didn't immediately recognize. A tall man with his back to me, dressed casually in jeans and a light blue button-down shirt. As I approached, Diana spotted me and waved frantically. "Sarah! Finally! Look who just showed. Up!" The man turned and I froze in shock. It was James Harrington, the architect from the Dallas project, the same one Diana had mentioned to Rachel when discussing my love life. The one I'd gone on several dates with before distance and work commitments had complicated things. "James?" I managed, utterly bewildered. "What are you doing here?" He looked almost as surprised as I felt. "Diana invited me," he said, glancing between Diana and me with confusion. "She said it was a surprise for your grandparents' anniversary. That you wanted me to come but were too busy to arrange it. I was in Minneapolis for a conference anyway, so it seemed perfect timing." I turned to Diana, who had the grace to look slightly guilty. "Surprise?" she offered weakly. Understanding dawned. The conversation on the dock earlier, Rachel and Diana's heads bent together in discussion. They had planned this. Somehow, in the span of less than a day, my best friend and my sister had conspired to inject my casual dating life into what was already a complicated family weekend. "Can we talk?" I said to Diana, my voice tightly controlled. "Privately?" As we moved away from the group, I could hear Rachel enthusiastically introducing James to my parents, who had appeared on the scene, looking confused but pleased. Once we were out of earshot, I rounded on Diana. "What were you thinking? You had no right to do this." Diana held up her hands defensively. I know, but hear me out. After talking with Rachel yesterday, I realized something important. You've been using work as a shield, Sarah. A reason to keep people at a distance, not just your family, but anyone who might get close to you. "That's not true," I protested, though a small voice inside me whispered that perhaps it was. "It is true," Diana insisted gently. "When things started getting serious with James, you found a dozen reasons why it couldn't work. The distance, your schedules, the fact that you might sometimes be competing for the same projects. But the truth is, you were scared. Just like you were scared to show your success to your family." Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. "So you took it upon yourself to ambush me in front of my entire extended family? With a man I haven't spoken to in over a month?" Diana winced. "When you put it that way, it does sound bad. For what it's worth, James has been asking about you. When I mentioned I was coming here with you this weekend, he seemed genuinely disappointed not to have been invited. It was Rachel who suggested inviting him." This revelation surprised me. "Rachel? Why would she care about my love life?" "Because despite everything, she's your sister and she cares about you," Diana said simply. "She doesn't want you to be alone. Neither do I." I took a deep breath, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. Part of me was furious at the interference, but another part, a part I didn't often acknowledge, was touched by the concern behind it, misguided as the execution might have been. "I'll deal with Rachel later," I said finally. "Right now, I need to figure out what to do about James. I can't just send him away. He drove all the way here." Diana nodded, relief evident in her expression. "For what it's worth, he seemed really happy at the prospect of seeing you. Maybe this weekend is about more than just reconciling with your family. Maybe it's about being open to all the connections you've been keeping at arm's length." With those words hanging in the air, we returned to the dock where James was now, engaged in conversation with my father, who appeared to be asking him detailed questions about structural engineering. Rachel caught my eye as I approached and had the decency to look somewhat apologetic. "Hi," I said to James, interrupting what appeared to be a fascinating discussion about load-bearing walls. "Can we take a walk? I feel like we have some catching up to do." He smiled, that same warm smile that had first attracted me to him across a conference table in Dallas. "I'd like that." As we strolled along the lakeshore, away from the curious eyes of my family, an awkward silence stretched between us. Finally, I said, "I'm sorry about this. I had no idea Diana was planning to invite you. I gathered that from your expression," he replied with a slight laugh. For a moment there, I thought I'd made a terrible mistake in coming. "It's not that I'm not happy to see you," I clarified quickly. "I'm just surprised and a little embarrassed about the circumstances." James stopped walking, turning to face me directly. "Sarah, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. You haven't returned my calls or messages." I felt a flush of guilt. It was true. After our last dinner in Chicago, when the conversation had veered dangerously close to discussions of future plans and deeper commitments, I had deliberately pulled back, using a major deadline as an excuse to create distance. "I know," I admitted. "I'm sorry. Things got complicated." "Work got busy," he supplied, a knowing edge to his voice. "It always does, doesn't it? For both of us." "Yes," I agreed, grateful for the easy out he'd provided, even as I recognized the pattern Diana had called me out on. James sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture I remembered from our long design discussions. "Look, I didn't come here to pressure you or to create an awkward situation. When Diana called, I genuinely thought you wanted me here. But now that I'm here, I have to ask, what happened? I thought we were connecting, and then suddenly you were unreachable." The direct question demanded an honest answer, something I'd been avoiding giving not just to James, but to myself. "I got scared," I admitted quietly. "We were getting closer, and I started worrying about how it would work long term. Your firm in Dallas, mine in Chicago. The same challenges we discussed and agreed were worth navigating," he pointed out gently. "I know. But then I started thinking about what it would mean to make room in my life for a serious relationship. The compromises, the adjustments. I've worked so hard to build my career, my independence." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You thought a relationship would threaten that. That you'd have to give up pieces of what you've built." "Something like that," I acknowledged, surprised by his perception. "And did it occur to you that I might feel the same way?" he asked. "That I've also built a career I'm proud of, an independent life I value? That what attracted me to you in the first place was your ambition, your talent, your self-sufficiency?" This perspective hadn't crossed my mind. In my mental calculations, relationships had always represented potential limitations, not opportunities, for mutual growth. Before I could formulate a response, a shout from the direction of the house interrupted our conversation. "Sarah, James!" It was Emma, waving frantically from the lawn. "They're about to take the big family photo. Everyone's looking for you." James looked at me questioningly. "Should we continue this later?" I nodded, oddly relieved for the interruption, yet frustrated by the unfinished nature of our conversation. "Yes, we should." The family photo was a chaotic affair, with nearly 30 people trying to arrange themselves on the gently sloping lawn in front of the lake house. My grandparents sat in chairs at the center, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren in ascending rows. James stood awkwardly to the side until my grandmother spotted him. "Young man, you're not escaping the photo," she called with surprising authority. "Come stand behind Sarah. You're part of the celebration now." Amid the good-natured laughter that followed, James joined the group, positioning himself behind me as directed. As we all smiled for the camera, I felt his presence like a warm current, both comforting and unsettling in its implications. After the photo session, the gathering dispersed again into smaller groups. I was helping my mother and aunt set up for the evening's anniversary dinner when Rachel approached, carrying a vase of freshly cut flowers from my grandmother's garden. "So," she said, her tone carefully casual as she arranged the blooms. "James, seems nice." I gave her a pointed look. "Don't think I don't know you had a hand in his sudden appearance." "Diana told you about our little scheme," she deduced, not looking particularly repentant. "Are you very angry?" I should have been furious, but somehow, the events of the past 24 hours had shifted something fundamental between Rachel and me. "I'm annoyed," I settled on. "But not angry, though I am curious why my love life suddenly became your concern." Rachel set down the vase, turning to face me directly. "Because despite our differences, I want you to be happy, Sarah. And when Diana mentioned this architect who seemed perfect for you, successful in his own right, understands your work, clearly interested, it seemed like fate that he was already so nearby." Her sincerity surprised me. "That's unexpectedly thoughtful of you." "Don't sound so shocked," she said, a hint of the old defensive Rachel creeping into her voice. "I'm not a complete monster, you know." "I never thought you were," I assured her quickly. "It's just, we've spent so many years at odds, it's hard to adjust to you taking an interest in my happiness." Rachel was quiet for a moment, arranging napkins with unnecessary precision. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its defensive edge. "After our talk on the dock yesterday, I've been doing a lot of thinking about how I've treated you over the years, about the assumptions I made." She looked up, meeting my eyes, directly. "I always thought I was the successful one because I followed the expected path. But seeing you now, what you've built, I realize success looks different for different people." "That's a surprisingly profound observation," I said, softening. "I'm occasionally profound," she replied with a small smile. "The point is, I've spent years competing with you in my mind, trying to prove my choices were better. But maybe there isn't a better, just different paths that work for different people." Her words echoed my own recent thoughts so closely that I felt a strange sense of connection with my sister, perhaps stronger than I had in years. "That's exactly it," I agreed. "And maybe both paths can include happiness, fulfillment, even relationships." Rachel's smile widened. "So you're not completely opposed to exploring things with James?" I didn't say that, I hedged, though my resolve was weakening. "But I admit seeing him here in this context, it makes me reconsider some things." "Good," Rachel said decisively. "Because I invited him to stay for the anniversary dinner tonight." I rolled my eyes, but there was no real annoyance behind the gesture. "Of course you did. Any other surprises I should know about? Have you hired a wedding planner too?" Rachel laughed, the sound surprisingly carefree. "Not yet, but give me time. I'm just getting started on this supportive sister business." As we continued with the dinner preparations, I found myself watching James through the windows as he chatted with my father and grandfather near the grill. There was an ease to his interactions, a genuine interest in their conversation that seemed to transcend mere politeness. My grandfather was gesturing animatedly, likely sharing one of his endless supply of fishing stories, and James was listening with what appeared to be genuine engagement. "He fits in well," my mother observed, appearing beside me with a stack of plates. "Your young man." "He's not my young man," I corrected automatically. "We've only gone on a few dates." My mother raised an eyebrow, a knowing expression crossing her face. If you say so, dear. But he flew to another state to surprise you at a family gathering. That suggests a certain level of interest. Actually, he was already in Minneapolis for a conference, I clarified. And Diana and Rachel orchestrated the surprise without my knowledge. Even so, my mother persisted, he could have declined. The fact that he came, knowing how important this weekend is to our family, speaks volumes. Before I could formulate a response, Diana burst into the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement. Sarah, your grandfather just invited James to go fishing with him tomorrow morning, and he accepted. This news genuinely surprised me. My grandfather's early morning fishing expeditions were legendary in the family, both for the ungodly hour at which they began and for the special status conferred upon those invited to join. It was a privilege rarely extended to non-family members. Wow, I said, unsure how to process this development. That's significant. Extremely, my mother agreed, looking pleased. Your grandfather hasn't invited an outsider fishing since that nice doctor from Mapleton who treated his gout 3 summers ago. Diana's expression was triumphant. See? Everyone likes him, and he's making an effort with your family, which is more than can be said for that hedge fund manager you dated last year. That was one dinner, I protested, remembering the disastrous evening when I'd made the mistake of bringing a particularly arrogant date to meet Diana. And we're getting ahead of ourselves here. James and I barely know each other. Sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up, my mother said with unexpected romanticism before bustling away with the plates. Diana seized the opportunity to pull me into the pantry, away from curious ears. Okay, honest assessment time. Are you glad he's here, or do you want me to create a convenient emergency that requires his immediate departure? I considered the question seriously. Despite the initial shock and annoyance at Diana and Rachel's interference, I had to admit that seeing James here, watching him interact so naturally with my family, had stirred something in me that I'd been trying to ignore since our last dinner in Chicago. I'm glad he's here, I admitted finally, though I'm still mad at you for going behind my back. Diana's face broke into a relieved smile. I can live with that, and for what it's worth, when I called him, I thought I was doing you a favor. You light up when you talk about him, Sarah, even when you're trying not to. I haven't seen that with anyone else you've dated. I wanted to deny it, but even I could recognize the truth in her words. There had been something different about my connection with James from the beginning, a mutual respect and understanding that went beyond physical attraction or shared interests. Let's just see how the weekend unfolds, I said, unwilling to commit to more than that. And no more surprise guests, understood? Diana crossed her heart solemnly. Promise. Though I should mention that your mother asked for his food preferences for dinner. I groaned, pushing past her out of the pantry. Of course she did. The rest of the afternoon passed in a whirl of anniversary preparations. I managed to carve out an hour to work on the lake house renovation plans, sketching preliminary ideas based on my conversation with my father. Absorbed in the familiar comfort of design work, I didn't notice James's approach until he spoke. Accessibility modifications for an older structure? He asked, peering over my shoulder at the drawings spread across the picnic table I'd claimed as my temporary workspace. I looked up, startled. Yes, for my grandparents. The stairs are becoming difficult for them. He nodded appreciatively, studying my sketches with professional interest. I like what you're doing with the flow here, integrating the new master suite without disrupting the original character of the house. That's the challenge, I agreed, pleased by his understanding. It's not just about adding a bedroom on the main floor. It's about preserving what makes this place special while adapting it to their changing needs. Mind if I sit? He asked, gesturing to the bench opposite me. I hesitated only briefly before nodding. As he settled across from me, I was struck again by how comfortable his presence felt. even after the weeks of silence between us. "I've missed this," he said quietly, watching me work. "Talking design with you. No one else quite gets my obsession with the perfect sightline or the importance of natural light patterns." I smiled despite myself. "What about your entire firm of architects back in Dallas?" "Not the same," he said simply. "They don't challenge me the way you do. Remember that argument we had about the atrium in the Houston proposal?" I laughed at the memory. "You were so stubborn about maintaining the sightlines that you were willing to sacrifice 20% of the usable space. And you convinced me there was a better way to achieve both," he acknowledged. "That's what I miss. Your perspective. Your way of seeing possibilities I miss." The sincerity in his voice made me set down my pencil and really look at him. "James, about what happened, why I pulled back." He held up a hand. "You don't need to explain. Diana already gave me the condensed version. You're afraid of what getting serious might mean for your independence, your career." "That's part of it," I admitted. "But there's more. My whole life, I've defined myself by my ability to stand on my own, to not need anyone. It's how I survived leaving Mapleton, building my career from nothing. The idea of becoming vulnerable, of letting someone else become essential to my happiness, it's terrifying." James considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Can I offer a different perspective?" I nodded, curious. "Interdependence isn't the same as dependence," he said carefully. "What if a relationship could make both people stronger, more fulfilled in their individual pursuits, not less? What if the right partner doesn't diminish you but amplifies who you already are?" His words resonated in a way I hadn't expected. "Is that what you think we could be?" I asked, surprised by my own directness. "I think it's worth finding out," he said simply. "I'm not asking for promises, Sarah, just openness to the possibility." Before I could respond, we were interrupted by my nephew Max, who came racing around the corner of the house, clearly on a mission. "Aunt Sarah! Aunt Sarah! Grandma says to tell you and Mr. James that dinner's in 30 minutes and you need to, He scrunched his face, trying to remember the exact message. "Freshen up and look presentable." James and I exchanged amused glances. "Tell Grandma we'll be there, looking very presentable," I assured Max, who nodded solemnly before dashing off again. "To be continued?" James suggested, standing. "To be continued," I agreed, gathering my sketches. As I watched him walk back toward the guest cottages where my mother had apparently arranged for him to stay, I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The weekend was taking turns I never could have predicted. The anniversary dinner was a beautiful affair, with tables arranged on the expansive deck overlooking the lake, twinkling fairy lights strung overhead, and an impressive spread of food that combined family favorites with more elegant fare. My grandparents sat at the center table, looking happy and slightly overwhelmed by the fuss being made over them. I found myself seated between James and my cousin Emma, with Rachel and her family directly across from us. The conversation flowed, easily, ranging from family stories to current events to passionate debates about the best method for grilling corn on the cob. Throughout it all, I was aware of James beside me. His laugh, the occasional brush of his arm against mine, the way he seamlessly joined the family banter as if he'd known everyone for years. Midway through the meal, my grandfather tapped his glass with a spoon, calling for attention. The conversations around the tables gradually quieted as all eyes turned to him. "Margaret and I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate with us," he began, his voice strong despite his years. 50 years of marriage is quite a milestone, and having our family gathered here makes it even more special. My grandmother reached over to take his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "When we bought this lake house 45 years ago," my grandfather continued, "we dreamed of filling it with children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. That dream has come true beyond our expectations." He paused, looking around at the gathered faces. "But a house is just a structure. It's the people inside it that make it a home. The connections between us, that's what matters." As he spoke, I felt James's hand find mine under the table, his fingers gently intertwining with my own. The gesture was subtle, private amid the public moment, and I found myself squeezing back instead of pulling away. "Life takes us in different directions," my grandfather went on, his gaze momentarily resting on me. "Some of us stay close to home, others venture far afield, but family remains family, regardless of distance. The love remains. The connection endures." There was a murmur of agreement around the tables. I felt a lump forming in my throat, touched by the simple wisdom in his words and their particular relevance to my own situation. So tonight, we celebrate not just Margaret's and my 50 years together, but all of you, the family we've created, the connections that sustain us. And we welcome new friends, he added with a nod toward James, who enrich our circle. Glasses were raised in toast, and conversation resumed, but something had shifted in the atmosphere, a deepening of the sense of belonging that had been growing in me since my arrival. For the first time in years, I felt truly part of this family, not as the prodigal daughter, returning nor as the successful outsider making a brief appearance, but simply as Sarah, granddaughter, daughter, sister, aunt, a woman with her own path but still connected to these people who had shaped her beginnings. After dinner, as people lingered over dessert and coffee, Rachel approached me where I stood at the railing, looking out over the moonlit lake. "So," she said, nodding toward James, who was deep in conversation with our father about sustainable building materials, "are you still mad about our little matchmaking scheme?" I considered the question honestly. "No," I admitted, "though I'm not ready to thank you for it either." Rachel laughed softly. "Fair enough. He really seems to care about you, you know. The way he looks at you when you're not watching. It's something special." Her observation made my chest tighten with an emotion I wasn't quite ready to name. "We'll see," I said noncommittally. "There are still a lot of practical challenges. Chicago and Dallas aren't exactly neighbors." "Practical challenges can be solved," Rachel pointed out. "The question is whether what you might build together is worth solving them for." I turned to look at her, surprised by her insight. "When did you get so wise about relationships?" She shrugged, a small smile playing at her lips. 15 years of marriage teaches you a few things, including that the right person doesn't limit your world, they expand it." She glanced toward Tom, who was helping their sleepy children gather their things to head back to their cabin. "I used to worry that getting married young, staying in Mapleton, meant I was settling for a small life. But I've realized that the size of your life isn't measured by geography or career achievements. It's measured by love, by connection, by purpose." Her words struck me with unexpected force, echoing what James had said earlier about interdependence. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said simply. "And for what it's worth, I think you can have both. Your amazing career and a meaningful relationship. They don't have to be mutually exclusive." Before I could respond, Diana joined us, slipping her arm through mine. "Sorry to interrupt the sister bonding, but I need to steal Sarah for a minute. Emma's organized an impromptu bonfire on the beach, and apparently s'mores are mandatory." Rachel smiled, stepping back. "Go ahead, we have all weekend to talk." As Diana led me toward the path to the beach where figures were already gathering around a growing fire, she gave me a searching look. "You okay? You seem deep in thought." "I'm fine," I assured her. "Just processing a lot." She nodded understandingly. "It's been an eventful 24 hours. Family reconciliations, surprising revelations, unexpected guests. You're still not completely forgiven for that last one," I reminded her. Though there was no heat in my words. But I will be, she predicted confidently, especially after you see how good James looks in firelight while making you the perfect toasted marshmallow. I couldn't help but laugh at her shamelessness. You're impossible. But lovable, she countered. And usually right. Down on the beach, the bonfire cast a warm circle of light against the darkness. My family had gathered in small groups. Aunts and uncles in camping chairs, cousins sprawled on blankets, the few remaining children excitedly preparing marshmallow roasting sticks under my grandfather's supervision. James was there too, deep in conversation with Emma's husband Mark, both of them laughing at some shared joke. As I approached, James looked up, his face brightening at the sight of me in a way that made my stomach flip with something that felt dangerously like happiness. He patted the empty space beside him on the large driftwood log he was using as a seat, and without overthinking it, I joined him. Your cousin Emma was just telling me about your lake house adventures growing up, he said as I settled beside him. Apparently you were quite the daredevil, jumping off the boathouse roof despite repeated prohibitions. I shot Emma a mock glare. Traitor! We swore never to mention the boathouse incident to our parents. Emma grinned unrepentantly. The statute of limitations has expired. Besides, James should know what he's getting himself into. A relationship with a known rule breaker. The casual assumption that James and I were headed toward a relationship might have made me bristle just a day earlier. But now I found myself simply smiling, accepting the gentle teasing without the need to correct or clarify. Something was shifting inside me. A gradual release of the defensive posture I'd maintained for so long. As the evening progressed, with stories and laughter flowing as freely as the wine being passed around, I found myself leaning slightly against James's solid presence beside me. The simple contact, shoulder against shoulder, his arm occasionally brushing mine as he demonstrated the perfect marshmallow roasting technique, felt surprisingly right, as if we'd sat beside countless fires together before. When the youngest children began to doze off in their parents' laps and the conversations grew quieter, more intimate, James turned to me with a question in his eyes. "Walk with me?" he suggested softly. I nodded, and we slipped away from the key circle of firelight, following the shoreline where moonlight silvered the gentle waves lapping at the beach. We walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, the sounds of laughter and conversation from the bonfire growing fainter behind us. "Your family is wonderful," James said finally. "Complicated, but wonderful." I smiled at his perceptiveness. That's exactly how Diana described them. And you're right, they are both those things. I understand better now, he continued, thoughtfully. Why you've kept parts of yourself separate from them, I mean. There's a weight to family history, to the roles we get assigned early on. It can be hard to redefine yourself within that context. His insight surprised me. Yes, exactly. For years I was Sarah the dreamer, the impractical one who left for the big city. It was easier to keep my success separate than to challenge that narrative. "And now?" he asked, his gaze searching mine in the moonlight. "Now I'm realizing that maybe I've been the one clinging to that old narrative more than anyone else," I admitted. "My family is more willing to see who I've become than I gave them credit for." James nodded, as if this made perfect sense. We reached a small wooden pier extending into the lake, and by unspoken agreement, we walked to the end and sat, letting our feet dangle above the water. "What about you?" I asked after a moment. "You seem to fit in so naturally with my crazy family, but you've barely mentioned yours." A shadow crossed his face. "My family situation is less cohesive than yours. My parents divorced when I was 12, both remarried several times. Holiday gatherings tend to be diplomatic negotiations rather than celebrations." He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Maybe that's why I've enjoyed this weekend so much, despite the unusual circumstances of my invitation. There's something genuine here, something real. His vulnerability touched me, opening a door to understanding him better. Is that what you're looking for? Something real? Isn't everyone? He countered gently. But yes, especially in my life now. I've reached a point professionally where I've achieved the goals I set for myself. What I haven't built is the connection, the partnership that makes those achievements meaningful. His words resonated deeply with me. Without my conscious awareness, my own priorities had been shifting similarly. The professional recognition, the financial success, they had fulfilled certain ambitions but left others untouched. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, I told him, watching the moonlight dance across the water. About interdependence versus dependence. About how the right relationship can amplify who you already are, rather than diminishing you. James waited, giving me space to continue at my own pace. I think I've been afraid of losing myself, I confessed. My independence has been such a defining part of who I am for so long that the idea of sharing my life, of factoring someone else into my decisions, felt like a kind of surrender. It would be, James said quietly, if you were with someone who wanted you to be less than you are. But what if it could be an expansion instead? What if two successful, independent people could build something together that enhances both their lives? The possibility hung between us, tantalizing in its potential. That's what scares me, I admitted. Not that it wouldn't work, but that it could. That it might be worth rearranging my carefully constructed life for. James reached for my hand, his touch warm and steady. I'm not asking you to rearrange everything tonight, Sarah, just to be open to exploring what we might be together. Before I could respond, a voice called from the shore. Diana, her silhouette recognizable even in the darkness. Sarah? James? Sorry to interrupt, but your grandparents are about to leave, and they're looking for you to say goodnight. We stood reluctantly, our conversation paused but not concluded. As we made our way back along the shore, James kept hold of my hand, a silent declaration of intent that I didn't pull away from. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of goodnights and tomorrow's plans. My grandparents departed for their bedroom in the main house, accepting kisses and well wishes from the assembled family. Gradually, other family members drifted away to their various accommodations until only a few of us remained. Diana, Emma and her husband, Rachel and Tom, James and me. Wine on the deck? Emma suggested, holding up an unopened bottle she'd rescued from the dinner table. It's still early and the kids are all down for the night. The six of us settled into comfortable chairs on the deck, wine glasses in hand, the conversation flowing naturally between family updates, work stories, and gentle teasing. I found myself watching Rachel, noting how she'd softened toward me, how the competitive edge that had characterized our interactions for years had mellowed into something approaching mutual respect. When Rachel and Tom finally said goodnight, heading back to their cabin to relieve the teenage cousin who'd been babysitting their children, Rachel paused to give me a quick, unexpected hug. I'm glad you came, she whispered. All of it, the Jet, James, everything. I'm just glad you're here. The simple sincerity in her voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Me too, I managed, giving her an extra squeeze before letting go. Soon after, Emma and her husband made their exit as well, leaving just Diana, James, and me on the deck, the night silence broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the occasional call of a night bird. Diana yawned elaborately, not even trying to be subtle. Well, I'm exhausted. All this family bonding has worn me out. I think I'll head back to the cottage and turn in. She shot me a meaningful look as she stood. Don't rush back on my account. I'm a very sound sleeper. Very, very sound. I rolled my eyes at her complete lack of subtlety, but couldn't help smiling. Good night, Diana. When she was gone, James and I were left alone on the deck, the space between us charged with possibility. For a moment, neither of us spoke, content to sit in the comfortable silence that had always been a hallmark of our connection. "Your friend is about as subtle as a bulldozer," James finally remarked, amusement coloring his voice. I laughed softly. "Diana has many virtues. Subtlety has never been one of them." "I like that about her," he said. "Her directness. She loves you, wants you to be happy. It's good to have people like that in your life." "It is," I agreed, thinking of how Diana had stood by me through the lean years, the struggle to establish myself, the victories and disappointments. She's been my rock. I paused, considering. Maybe that's part of why relationships have been hard for me. I already had that emotional support in Diana, in my work. I didn't feel like I was missing anything. James nodded thoughtfully. "Until you realize that different relationships fulfill different needs. Friendship, even the deepest kind, isn't the same as romantic partnership." "No," I agreed softly. "It isn't." James stood then, moving to the railing to look out over the moonlit lake. I joined him, drawn by some invisible thread that seemed to connect us despite all my attempts to sever it over the past weeks. "I have a confession to make," he said, his profile illuminated by the soft deck lights. "When Diana called me about coming here, I didn't hesitate for a moment. Not because I was already in Minneapolis, though that was convenient, but because I've been looking for a way back to you since you stopped returning my calls." His honesty demanded equal vulnerability from me. "I've missed you," I admitted. "More than I wanted to. More than made sense given how little time we actually spent together." He turned to face me fully then, his eyes searching mine. "Sometimes it's not about the quantity of time, but the quality of connection." "Yes," I whispered, feeling as if we were on the edge of something momentous. "That's exactly it." What happened next felt both inevitable and extraordinary. James leaned forward, his hand coming up to gently cup my cheek and kissed me. Unlike our previous kisses, which had been charged with the excitement of new attraction, this one held something deeper, a question, a promise, a beginning. When we finally broke apart, I felt as if something fundamental had shifted, like tectonic plates realigning to create a new landscape. "I'm still scared," I confessed, my hands resting lightly on his chest. "I know," he said simply. "So am I. But I think some things are worth being afraid for." The words resonated with a truth I couldn't deny. Throughout my life, the things that had mattered most, leaving Mapleton, building my career from nothing, taking creative risks that others cautioned against, had all been terrifying at the outset. Perhaps this was no different. Perhaps the fear wasn't a warning but a signpost, pointing toward something of value. "Stay," I said suddenly, surprising myself with the directness of the invitation. "After the reunion ends, stay in Chicago for a few days. Let's see if what we feel here translates to real life." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." We stayed on the deck a while longer, talking about practical things now, his schedule, mine, the logistics of extending his trip. But beneath the practical details ran a current of something new, something hopeful. Eventually, we walked back to the guest cottages together, his arm around my shoulders, mine around his waist, as if we'd been doing this for years rather than hours. At the door to my cottage, he kissed me again, a gentle goodnight that held the promise of tomorrow. Inside, I found Diana still awake, pretending to read a book but obviously waiting up for me. She took one look at my face and broke into a grin. "You don't have to say it. I told you so." I laughed, too happy to be annoyed by her smugness. "Yes, you did. And Rachel, too. You can both enjoy being right in the morning." As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking of the journey that had brought me to this moment. From the defensive, young woman who'd left Mapleton determined to prove herself, to the successful professional who'd arrived in a private jet, to this newer version of myself emerging now. A woman capable of success and connection, independence and partnership. Tomorrow would bring the final day of the reunion, more family time, more conversations with James, more steps on this new path opening before me. There were still logistical challenges to work through, practical concerns to address. Chicago and Dallas remained hundreds of miles apart. But for the first time, those obstacles seemed like problems to solve rather than insurmountable barriers. My sister had told everyone I was too poor to attend the family reunion. My private jet had proven otherwise. But the true revelation of the weekend had nothing to do with financial success or professional achievements. It was the discovery that I was rich in ways I hadn't fully appreciated, in family connections resilient enough to survive years of distance, in friendships loyal enough to call me out when needed, and in the capacity to open my carefully constructed life to new possibilities, new connections, new love. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking of something my grandmother had said earlier in the evening, as she and my grandfather were preparing to leave the celebration. The best journeys, she'd told me, her eyes twinkling with decades of wisdom, bring you right back where you need to be, but as a different, better version of yourself. I was beginning to understand exactly what she meant. 6 months after the reunion, I found myself back at the lake house, this time without the private jet. The fall colors painted the landscape in vibrant reds and golds, creating a completely different atmosphere from the summer gathering. James and I drove up from Chicago together, his car filled with design samples and blueprints for my grandparents' renovation, which was scheduled to begin the following month. The distance between Chicago and Dallas had proven manageable, with James's firm opening a Midwest satellite office that conveniently required his presence several times a month. Rachel and her family arrived shortly after us, her enthusiasm for the weekend genuine and uncomplicated by the competitive undercurrent that had characterized our relationship for so long. She'd enrolled in her first landscape architecture course at the community college and brought her initial designs to show me, her excitement palpable as she spread them across the kitchen table. "What do you think?" she asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice that was still new between us. "Be honest." I studied her work with professional attention, noting the natural talent evident even in these beginner attempts. "You have a good eye for spatial relationships," I told her truthfully. "The way you've integrated the water feature here is particularly effective." The smile that spread across her face was worth every mile of the journey. Later, as the four of us, Rachel, Tom, James, and I, sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the sky in breathtaking hues, I reflected on how much had changed in such a relatively short time. The walls I'd built around my life had not come crashing down so much as they had gradually opened, creating doorways where before there had only been barriers. My phone buzzed with a message from Diana, who was flying in tomorrow with her newly announced fiancé. "On our way soon," she texted, followed by a string of celebratory emojis. "Can't believe we're all going to be there for the big surprise." The big surprise was my grandfather's idea, a renewal of vows for my grandparents, planned for their 50th anniversary weekend. The family would be gathering once again, but this time there would be no pretense, no misunderstandings about who I was or what I had achieved. This time I was arriving simply as myself, successful, yes, but also reconnected, engaged with my family in a way I hadn't been for years. As if reading my thoughts, James squeezed my hand. "Penny for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about how things come full circle," I said, watching a pair of ducks glide across the water. 6 months ago, I flew in here determined to prove something. Now I'm just happy to be here. "That's growth," Rachel observed, surprising me with her perception. "Learning that you don't have to prove anything to the people who love you." It was such a simple truth, yet one that had taken me years to understand. As the light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, I found myself filled with a quiet contentment that had nothing to do with private jets or professional accolades. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys aren't the ones that take you far from home, but the ones that bring you back with new eyes. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.